Hello everyone, welcome to Pens and Needles. This is Erin and Ted, and today we're going to be talking about how to make one of my favorite simple patterns called a bias scarf. Now when I first saw this pattern, I didn't think I could figure out how to do it, and I had been making socks and sweaters and all sorts of tricky items. It's actually really simple. It's a rule-based project, so all you need to do to make something like this is get two types of yarn. I would recommend for your yarn to get fingering or lace weight. You want something really fine so that you can get that drapey feel. You can also use fibers that drape naturally like silk or linen or cotton, and you're going to want to have the colors be high contrast so you can see these stripes. As you knit it, it will get a little bit thinner, but all you really need to do is follow these two rules that I'm going to show you right now, and then you'll be able to see how to make your own. So I've made this orange and yellow one with lace weight yarn, but I've also made a green and blue one with fingering weight yarn. So it's a little bit thicker. One of them is wool, the other one is silk, so you get that contrast of sort of a super high sheen and satiny kind of look, that shiny silk look, against the sort of slightly fuzzier texture of the wool yarn. So that's really nice as well. So I'll show you how to make this style. Again, it's the same rule, but you're going to get a slightly different look depending on what yarns you choose to use. You're going to have two sides. All right, so I like to think of the front side, the side that I start on, and then the reverse side, so the side that I'm coming back on with my work. I recommend casting on 24 stitches, so you have enough to really get like your base. Your base is actually not going to be this way, but it's going to be this way. It's going to be at an angle, so you want it to be a little wider than you'd expect. So I would recommend casting on 24. Now you can adjust any of these rules, so you can say, I don't want to cast on 24, I want to cast on 16, I want to cast on 84. Do whatever you want, but you want to make sure that you have more than 4 stitches, because those 2 stitches on either end are going to constitute our rule. So the first rule is on the front side of the work. So after you've cast on those stitches, you're going to knit all the way across, and when you get to the last 2 stitches, you're going to knit those together. So that's very simple. You just insert your needle under 2 loops, you wrap around, and you pull through both of those loops, and you drop them both off the needle. That's going to decrease or create an inward angle for your work. Then you're going to flip your work around. And sometimes when I recommend knitting up a straight piece of work, I recommend flipping the first stitch so that it just evens it out. Don't do that here. Your edges are going to be stretched out because it's at an angle. So you really want to make sure that you knit into that first stitch, knit all the way across until the last 2 stitches. And then here you're going to make 1 and knit 2. You could also knit 1, make 1, knit 1. It doesn't really matter precisely where you make that stitch, but you want it to be on that edge. So I usually make 1, knit 2. And that just gives me a little bit of extra stability, especially in such a lacy scarf, but it's up to you. Yarn over on your way over. Let's say we're going back to the front side, then it will be really easy to see, oh, that's where I've made a stitch, and you can flip it and knit into that. So that's something that might help, especially if you're a beginner knitter. Well, I'm mentioning that because this is a great project for beginner knitters. It looks really classy, it's really elegant. I've had lots of people request that I make them a scarf like this. I told them you could probably make it yourself, and they said, no, you do it. So I think it's definitely a great project to take on, and it's really fast because it is so loose and net-like. All right, so Those are our two rules on the front side and the back side. Now, how you get the stripe pattern is that you determine a number of rows that you're going to complete before you switch colors. So on this orange scarf, I actually have places where I have 2 sets of rules in orange and 2 sets of rules in yellow. So that's a front side, back side, front side, back side. That's the 2 sets in orange. And then I just add in the yellow and I knit with the yellow, front side, back side, front side, back side. And then I switch over to the orange. If you want, you can sort of weave the 2 yarns together on that side that they're both hanging off of whenever you get to that first row, but you don't have to. You can just loosely pull it up to the next row. And there are other parts of the scarf. Right here, you might be able to tell that the stripes are actually a little bit wider, and that's because I did 6 rows or 3 sets of those rules. And you can do that on the green and blue scarf. You can keep it all the same. It's up to you. But it might add a little bit of interest to have some areas of your scarf be a bit wider stripes and some be a bit narrower. And that's as simple as it is. You just decide how many rows between each color change. We're going to knit. Now we're going to knit. And we're going to knit through the back. Through the back loop. Or another way you can do that is to flip it so it's like this and knit through the front loop. Okay, they're both the same. And you knit all the way across. Alright, so then we're going to take this new yarn. Alright, when you've gotten the length that you think you want your scarf to be, you're going to cast off and then you're going to block it. That's really essential for this particular project. All you need is water and if you have an ironing board or something to poke your scarf into. I actually have over here a giant piece of styrofoam that I use to block some of my items. Ted is very interested. And I got that in a box that I had delivered once. And that you just put pins, you know, and you kind of stretch out your scarf because it's in garter stitch, which means you're knitting on both sides. And it's going to want to squish together, right? So you need to resist that urge. You need to train the fibers to stand apart. And to do that, you want to block it. Now look at your fiber type. It's going to vary based on what you have. Wool is really a great fiber for blocking because it has memory. So it will, once you set it using heat and water, it will likely stay that way. Even if you wrinkle it, even if it gets a little wet, but it's not hot, like if you go out in the rain or the snow, it'll probably go back to the setting that you set it at. So for wool, you might want to first try just wet blocking with normal temperature water. But if it doesn't get you quite the results you want, you can bring an iron in, not on the styrofoam, on an ironing board, right? and get some heat involved, and that will really set it into position. With silk, you want to be more careful with heat, so I would recommend a gentler method, just using water. With something like alpaca, which has a hollow fiber, you actually want to stretch the item out dry and then spray water on. And that's just a better method, because if you get the fibers wet and you stretch them, because they're so delicate, when you are trying to stretch them out and they're wet, the heaviness of the water and the delicateness of the fibers can be really damaging to your alpaca. So look at the material that you have, and usually you can look up what's the best way to block it, and you can follow those instructions. If you have something like acrylic, you're going to have a slightly different effect. Maybe you need to really crank up the heat on your iron to get it to set the way you want, but also be careful because sometimes the acrylic can melt. So you really want to find the fine line of how to treat the acrylic so that it behaves the way that you want. But whatever you do, if you have knit it up with a really thin yarn and really big needles, you shouldn't have too much of a problem, because it's going to want to drape. Just structurally, with all these gaps between the stitches, is going to want to drape. So as for the needle size, for my projects, I was using a size 10 needle for this one, and I just had it on circular needles that I was knitting back and forth. You can knit it on straight needles. I knit this one on straight needles. So it doesn't really matter what style of needle, but you want it to be much bigger than the yarn calls for, so that you have this nice loose texture. And maybe for you, it's, you're a tight knitter, and so you really want size 13 or, super chunky needles. That's fine. It doesn't matter what the size of the needle is. It doesn't matter what size the needle is, so long as the needle is large enough to obtain the gauge or the tension that you want for your scarf. Also remember, it will stretch a little bit when you block it. So if you're really nervous, you can make a small sample swatch and block it to test it out. So that can help as well. All right, I hope this inspires you and gives you the confidence to try out this fun rule-based design. And I really want to see what you make. If you like, you can find my Instagram and share your photos of what you've made on Instagram or my Ravelry Group page, and I'll check them out and maybe highlight them in one of my vlogs. So thank you so much for joining me. If you haven't already, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video.